The ceremonial horns echoed across the crystalline peaks of Fenris Prime as representatives from a dozen star systems gathered in the Great Hall of Howls. Ambassador Chen Nakamura adjusted his diplomatic uniform, feeling the weight of humanity's first invitation to the Lupine Confederation's most sacred gathering. The massive stone chamber stretched beyond sight, its walls carved with the hunting chronicles of 1,000 generations. At the hall's center, elevated on a platform of meteoric iron, sat the Wolf Queen Vylara. Her silver fur gleamed under the bioluminescent crystals that lined the ceiling, and her amber eyes held the wisdom of centuries. She stood nearly 3 meters tall, her presence commanding absolute silence from the assembled delegates. Scars crisscrossed her muscular frame, each one a testament to battles fought and won across the galaxy. The time of choosing has come. Valera's voice boomed through the hall, a sound like distant thunder rolling through mountain valleys. My reign enters its final cycle, and the bloodline must continue. The ancient laws demand that only the strongest may sire the heir to the Fenris throne. The various alien delegates shifted nervously. The crystalline hive lords clicked their mandibles in what Chen recognized as uncertainty. The void wraith's ethereal forms flickered with agitation. Even the proud Dominion representatives, with their technological superiority, seemed uncomfortable with the primitive nature of the challenge. Chen had studied Lupine culture extensively during the 3-month journey to Fenris Prime. The Wolf Queen's challenge was legendary throughout this sector of the galaxy. Every 500 standard years, the ruling matriarch would issue a call for worthy mates. The trials that followed were said to be so brutal that many species had gone extinct attempting them. The trials begin at dawn, Vylara continued, her gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd. 3 tests will determine worthiness: strength of body, courage of spirit, and wisdom of mind. Only one may claim the right to father the next generation of Fenris royalty. A Dominion prince stepped forward, his powered armor gleaming. Your Majesty, surely these ancient customs are outdated. My empire offers technological alliance, vast resources, genetic perfection through our enhancement programs. The Wolf Queen's lips pulled back, revealing fangs the size of combat knives. Technology fails. Resources are consumed. Only the warrior spirit endures through all hardships. Her voice dropped to a growl that made several delegates step backward. The trials test what cannot be bought, stolen, or manufactured. Chen watched as various representatives began making excuses to leave. The merchant guilds cited urgent business elsewhere. The academic consortium claimed their scholars were needed for important research. One by one, the grand delegations that had arrived with such pomp began their hasty departures. By evening, only 7 delegates remained. The Dominion Prince, with his advanced armor. A crystalline hive lord, whose chitinous exoskeleton could deflect plasma fire. A void wraith whose incorporeal form could phase through solid matter. A stone giant from the Titan worlds, whose species measured strength in continental movements. A flame dancer from the solar courts, master of stellar energies. A psychic entity from the mind reaches, capable of bending reality with thought alone. And Chen Nakamura, human diplomat, representing Earth's small colonial expansion. The other 6 looked at him with mixtures of amusement and disdain. The Dominion Prince laughed openly. Surely the human jests. Your species has barely left your home system. What could you possibly offer? Sit sting. With 300, the stone giant's voice rumbled like an avalanche. Humans are soft creatures. They break easily. Chen remained silent, remembering his grandfather's stories from the resource wars, his mother's tales from the Martian independence conflict, his own service during the asteroid mining rebellions. Humanity had always been underestimated. It had become their greatest advantage. That night, Chen walked the moonlit gardens outside the Great Hall. The twin moons of Fenris cast everything in silver light, and the night-blooming thorn flowers filled the air with their metallic scent. He found Queen Vylara standing beside a fountain carved from a single massive crystal. You remain, she observed without turning around. The others make their preparations, consulting star charts and enhancement catalogs. Yet the human simply walks in my garden. Your Majesty, Chen bowed respectfully. I wanted to understand your world before facing your trials. She turned to face him, and Chen was struck by the intelligence in those ancient eyes. Tell me, human, why do you truly stay? Your species gains nothing from this alliance. The Confederation has no resources you need, no territories you desire. Chen considered his words carefully. Because someone should try. Because challenges exist to be met, not avoided. Because my people believe that running from difficult things makes you smaller, not safer. Valara's head tilted slightly, the lupine equivalent of surprise. Your species is strange. Most seek advantage, profit, or power. You speak of obligation to face hardship. We learned long ago that comfort is temporary, but character is permanent, Chen replied. Every generation faces trials that previous generations could never imagine. We prepare our children not by making their lives easier, but by teaching them to be stronger than their circumstances. And you believe you can succeed where beings of vastly superior physical capabilities will fail? Chen smiled grimly. Your Majesty, I believe that superior physical capabilities might actually be a disadvantage in truly testing trials. The strong often never learn to overcome impossible odds. They never develop the desperation-fueled creativity that comes from having no natural advantages to rely on. Queen Valara was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those penetrating amber eyes. The first trial begins at dawn. You may still withdraw with honor. None would think less of your species. With respect, Your Majesty, we would think less of ourselves. That's the only opinion that truly matters to a human. As Chen walked back to his quarters, he didn't notice the small smile that crossed the Wolf Queen's muzzle, nor the way her eyes lingered on his retreating form. In her centuries of rule, few beings had ever spoken of duty over desire, of character over capability. The dawn came too quickly. Announced by the deep howls of the ceremonial honor guard, Chen joined the other 6 contestants in the Great Hall, where Queen Valara waited on her throne. The morning light streaming through crystal windows turned her silver fur into molten metal. The first trial is strength, she announced. Not merely of muscle, but of will. You must retrieve the crown of thorns from the pit of sorrows. The descent is 3 kilometers through crushing gravity and poisonous atmosphere. The crown rests in chambers flooded with acid that dissolves most known materials. You have until sunset. She gestured toward a massive opening in the hall's floor, where stairs descended into absolute darkness. Only one may succeed. The crown cannot be divided, shared, or replicated. Choose your moment of descent carefully. The contestants approached the pit's edge. The Dominion Prince immediately activated his armor's scanners, analyzing the atmospheric composition below. The crystalline Hive Lord began secreting protective resin over his carapace. The Void Wraith simply phased partially out of the physical dimension to test the metaphysical barriers. Chen looked down into the darkness and felt the familiar flutter of fear in his stomach. Good. Fear meant his mind was working properly, calculating real dangers instead of assuming invincibility. He began his mental inventory. Basic environmental suit, emergency oxygen supply, standard diplomatic survival kit, and most importantly, the knowledge accumulated from humanity's long history of surviving in hostile environments. The stone giant was the first to descend, his massive form causing the stairs to crack under his weight. The increased gravity that should have been crippling seemed barely noticeable to his continental-scale physiology. The flame dancer followed, wreathing himself in stellar fire to burn through the poisonous atmosphere. Chen waited, watching, learning. The Dominion Prince's armor was already adapting to environmental hazards with each step. The crystalline Hive Lord's natural defenses were holding against the atmospheric toxins, but Chen noticed something the others missed in their rush to demonstrate superiority. The pit was designed as a test, not a death trap. The ancient lupines wouldn't have created a trial that simply killed everyone who attempted it. There had to be a way to succeed that didn't rely purely on overwhelming the obstacles through superior capability. As the morning progressed, Chen studied the pit's construction, the flow patterns of the toxic gases, the way the gravity field fluctuated. By noon, he had identified 17 distinct hazard zones, each requiring a different survival strategy. More importantly, He had noticed the subtle air current patterns that suggested hidden chambers and alternate routes. When Chen finally began his descent, the other contestants were already deep below. He moved carefully, methodically, treating each level as a separate problem to solve, rather than an obstacle to overcome through brute force. Where the others had powered through the increasing gravity, Chen used the ancient human techniques of load distribution and momentum conservation. In the crushing depths where the atmosphere became thick as soup, Chen activated his suit's recycling systems and entered a meditative breathing pattern learned from his childhood martial arts training. He moved like water, finding the path of least resistance, while above and below him the sounds of the other contestants' struggles echoed through the poisonous air. The stone giant had wedged himself in a narrow passage, his immense size becoming a liability in the confined spaces. The flame dancer's stellar fires were being extinguished by the exotic atmospheric composition. The Dominion Prince's armor was overheating from the constant environmental adaptations. Chen reached the acid chambers as the afternoon light was beginning to fade above. The crown of thorns sat on a pedestal in the center of a lake of chemical death, its crystalline structure glowing with inner light. The acid was eating through the chamber floor, creating bubbling pits that led to even deeper levels of the complex. The other contestants who had reached this level were stymied. The void wraith could phase through the acid, but couldn't interact with physical matter, while incorporeal. The psychic entity could manipulate reality around the crown, but the ancient lupine enchantments resisted mental influence. Chen studied the chamber for several minutes, noting the regular patterns in the acid's bubbling, the precise mathematical curves of the crown's placement, the way the light reflected off the poisonous liquid surface. This wasn't just a test of surviving the environment. It was a puzzle. The crown of thorns wasn't meant to be retrieved by overpowering the obstacles. It was meant to be earned through understanding. Chen began to move around the chamber's perimeter, following the subtle markers carved into the walls. The ancient lupines had been warriors, but they were also engineers who understood that true strength came from intelligence applied to difficult problems. Following the wall markings led Chen to a series of pressure plates hidden beneath the acid's surface. The pattern required precise timing and movement, activating them in a sequence that corresponded to the phases of Fenris's twin moons. As each plate was triggered, the acid level lowered slightly, revealing stepping stones that had been hidden beneath the surface. The path to the crown required not superhuman strength or technological superiority, but the patience to observe, the wisdom to understand, and the courage to trust in careful analysis over desperate action. Chen made his way across the revealed stepping stones as the other contestants watched in amazement. The crown of thorns was lighter than expected, its crystalline structure warm to the touch despite the hostile environment. As Chen lifted it from the pedestal, hidden mechanisms throughout the chamber activated, draining the acid lake and revealing safe passages back to the surface. By sunset, Chen emerged from the pit of sorrows, carrying the crown of thorns while the other contestants were still struggling in the depths below. Queen Vylara waited at the pit's edge, her expression unreadable. "The human succeeds where others fail," she observed, taking the crown from Chen's hands. "Tell me, diplomat of Earth, how did you solve in hours what has defeated champions for generations?" Chen removed his environmental helmet, breathing the clean air of the Great Hall with relief. "Your Majesty, I think the real test wasn't surviving the pit. It was understanding that the pit wasn't meant to be survived through force alone. Your ancestors built it as a teaching tool, not just a proving ground. They wanted rulers who could see solutions where others saw only obstacles." Valara's eyes glittered with something that might have been approval. "The human speaks wisdom, yet 2 trials remain, and they will test aspects of character that cannot be prepared for through study or analysis." As night fell over Fenris Prime, Chen prepared for the challenges ahead, knowing that he had passed the first test not through human superiority, but through the peculiarly human trait of assuming that every problem had a solution waiting to be discovered. The other contestants emerged from the pit over the following hours, each bearing the respect that came from attempting the impossible, but only Chen carried the confidence of having proven that impossible was just another word for unexplored. The first trial was complete, but Chen understood that the real tests were yet to come. Tomorrow would bring the trial of courage, and he suspected that facing his fears would be far more difficult than solving ancient puzzles in poisonous pits. But tonight, he would rest, and dream of home, and remember that he carried not just his own hopes, but the hopes of every human who had ever looked at the impossible and decided to try anyway. The second dawn on Fenris Prime brought blood-red skies and howling winds that seemed to carry the voices of ancient warriors. Chen woke to find his quarters filled with the scent of iron and ozone, the atmospheric disturbance that preceded the most feared of the Wolf Queen's trials. Through his window, he could see the other contestants gathering in the courtyard below. Their confidence from yesterday's competition notably diminished. Only 5 remained now. The stone giant had been permanently wedged in the pit's narrow passages, his rescue requiring industrial excavation equipment. The psychic entity had withdrawn during the night, claiming the ancient lupine mental barriers had damaged his consciousness in ways that would take centuries to heal. Queen Velara stood in the center of the great hall when the contestants assembled, but she seemed different today. Gone was the regal bearing of yesterday. Instead, she appeared as a warrior preparing for battle, her silver fur braided with iron rings, her claws extended and gleaming. Tribal war paint covered her face in patterns Chen didn't recognize, and her eyes held the wild gleam of barely controlled ferocity. "Today you face the trial of courage," she announced, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystal windows vibrate. "But understand this. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to act in spite of terror. The trial will show you your deepest fears made manifest. It will offer you every reason to flee, to hide, to abandon your purpose. Only one whose courage burns stronger than their terror may proceed to the final trial." She gestured toward a doorway that had not existed the day before, carved from the living rock of the mountain itself. The opening pulsed with a dim red light, and from within came sounds that made Chen's skin crawl. Screams, roars, the clash of weapons, and underneath it all, a whispered voice calling his name. "The trial chamber adapts to each contestant," Velara continued. "What you face within will be drawn from your own mind, your own memories, your own hidden terrors. There are no weapons inside save those you bring within yourself. There are no allies save your own determination. You may enter when ready, but know that some who enter are never seen again." The Dominion Prince stepped forward first, his powered armor gleaming with fresh modifications. "My empire's psychological conditioning has eliminated fear responses from my neural patterns. This trial holds no power over me." Valera's lip curled back from her fangs. "Arrogance is not courage, Prince. And those who claim to have no fears simply haven't met the right nightmares yet." Without ceremony, the prince strode through the doorway. The moment he crossed the threshold, his confident bearing evaporated. Through the translucent barrier that sealed the entrance behind him, the contestants could see him stumbling backward, his armor's lights flickering wildly. He began screaming orders to subordinates who weren't there, clawing at his helmet as if trying to remove it. Within minutes, he was curled in a corner, rocking back and forth, while his armor's systems ran diagnostic sequences on psychological trauma protocols. The crystalline Hive Lord approached the entrance next, his mandibles clicking in complex patterns that Chen recognized as prayer formulae. He paused at the threshold, antennae twitching as if sensing something beyond the visible spectrum, then stepped through with deliberate ceremony. The change in him was immediate and heartbreaking. The proud, ancient being began making sounds Chen had never heard from his species, keening wails of loss and desperation. Through the barrier, they could see him reaching toward empty air, his movements becoming increasingly frantic. He was calling out names in his clicking language, over and over, his entire body shaking with what appeared to be inconsolable grief. The Void Wraith phased partially out of reality before attempting entry, but it made no difference. Whatever waited beyond the threshold reached him even in his ethereal state. His incorporeal form began fluctuating wildly, solidifying and dispersing in patterns that spoke of panic beyond rational thought. He fled from the chamber within seconds, his form scattering like smoke in wind. Only the Flame Dancer and Chen remained, the Stellar being turned to Chen with eyes like miniature suns. "Human, I have witnessed the birth and death of stars. I have danced in the corona of supernovas. What fears could this primitive trial possibly hold for one such as I?" Chen nodded respectfully. I hope you find the answer to that question, friend. The flame dancer entered with confidence equal to the Dominion Prince, wreathing himself in stellar fire as he crossed the threshold. The fire died instantly. Through the barrier, Chen watched as the being of living starlight began to dim, his radiance flickering like a candle in wind. He dropped to his knees, reaching upward as if grasping for something infinitely far away, his voice rising in harmonies that spoke of cosmic loneliness so profound it made Chen's chest ache. Now only Chen remained before the trial chamber. Queen Valara studied him with those ancient amber eyes. "Tell me, human," she said quietly. "What do you fear?" Chen considered the question seriously. "Failure that hurts the people depending on me. Being powerless to protect those I care about. Discovering that I'm not strong enough when it matters most." He paused, meeting her gaze. "And you, Your Majesty? What do you fear?" Valara's ears flattened against her skull for just a moment, a flash of vulnerability before her royal mask returned. "I fear that in all the galaxy, there may be no one worthy to carry the strength my people need for the trials ahead. I fear that I may be the last true ruler of Fenris, and that my death will mark the beginning of my people's long decline into weakness and irrelevance." Chen stepped toward the chamber entrance, feeling the pull of otherworldly forces already beginning to probe his mind. "Then we both fear the same thing. Ultimately, we fear letting down those who trust us to be strong." He crossed the threshold. The transition was instantaneous and devastating. Chen found himself standing in the ruins of Earth's capital city, smoke rising from collapsed buildings, the sky dark with ash and alien ships. Bodies littered the streets, and in the distance, he could hear the screams of the dying. But worse than the scene of destruction were the voices calling his name. Voices he recognized. His sister Maria appeared from behind a collapsed wall, her diplomatic robes torn and bloodied. "You left us, Chen. You chose alien glory over human survival. Look what your ambition cost us." His mother stepped out of the rubble, her face a mask of disappointment. "We raised you to protect your own people. Instead, you went chasing impossible dreams while our world burned." The accusations came from every direction. His childhood friends, his academy instructors, fellow diplomats, all blaming him for pursuing the Wolf Queen's trials while humanity faced extinction. Each word was precisely calculated to find his deepest insecurities, his secret fears that his choices were driven by ego rather than duty. But Chen had faced darker moments than this during his military service. He had seen friends die because of orders he had given, had made impossible choices with imperfect information under desperate circumstances. The trial chamber's psychological assault was sophisticated, but it relied on guilt and self-doubt. Chen had learned long ago to separate necessary actions from comfortable feelings. "This isn't real," he said aloud, not to convince himself but to acknowledge the nature of the test. And even if it were real, running away from it wouldn't make it better. The illusions intensified. Now he was watching his childhood home burn while his family called for help he couldn't provide. He was reliving every moment of helplessness from his past. Every time he had been too weak, too slow, too stupid to prevent tragedy. Chen walked forward through the nightmare landscape. Each step was difficult, not because of physical obstacles, but because every survival instinct screamed at him to flee from the emotional pain. The trial chamber was forcing him to confront every failure, every moment of inadequacy, every time he had let people down. But as he continued forward, Chen began to understand something the other contestants had missed. The trial wasn't testing his ability to overcome fear. It was testing his willingness to continue functioning despite fear. Courage wasn't about being unafraid. It was about doing the right thing while afraid. The illusions changed tactics, offering him escape routes, a transport ship that could take him home to safety, a message from Earth recalling him from the mission, an easy way out that would let him avoid both the fears and the responsibility. Chen ignored them all. At the center of the nightmare landscape, he found what he had somehow known would be waiting, himself. But this version was everything he feared. Becoming weak, selfish, concerned only with personal safety. This shadow Chen mocked him with every word. You think you're brave? You're just too stupid to understand how outmatched you are. These aliens will crush you, and humanity will pay the price for your arrogance. Go home, little diplomat. Leave the real challenges to beings who might actually succeed. Chen looked at his shadow self for a long moment. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am outmatched. Maybe this is a mistake that will cost lives. He stepped closer to the shadow. But someone has to try. And if I don't, who will? Someone stronger, someone better, someone who isn't here right now. Chen's voice gained strength. Perfect people rarely show up when you need them. Usually, you have to work with whoever is available. Today, that's me. The Shadow Chen laughed bitterly. And you think that's enough? I think it has to be. Because the alternative is accepting defeat before the fight even begins. Chen reached out and embraced his shadow self, accepting both the fears and the doubts as part of who he was. The moment he stopped fighting the terror and started functioning alongside it, the illusions began to fade. The trial chamber's power came from forcing contestants to battle their own minds. But Chen had learned from years of dangerous missions that the goal wasn't to eliminate fear, it was to remain operational despite it. The chamber dissolved around him, returning him to the great hall where Queen Valara waited alone. The other contestants were gone, presumably withdrawn or incapacitated by their encounters with their own terrors. The human emerges intact, Valara observed, though Chen noticed a slight tremor in her voice. Tell me, what did you see in there? Chen considered his answer carefully. I saw every reason why I might fail. Every way this could go wrong. Every cost of attempting something beyond my capabilities. He met her gaze steadily, and I learned that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and choosing to act anyway, because the alternative is unacceptable. Valara was quiet for a long moment. The others saw their fears and were paralyzed by them. The prince saw his empire's fall and his own helplessness. The Hive Lord witnessed the extinction of his entire species. The Flame Dancer experienced the heat death of the universe and ultimate cosmic loneliness. Each was faced with their deepest terror and found it insurmountable. What did you expect them to do differently? What you did. Accept the fear as real. Acknowledge the possibility of failure. And continue anyway. She stood from her throne, moving to look out at the blood-red sky. Most beings, when faced with genuine terror, either flee or freeze. Warriors are taught to overcome fear through training and preparation, but true courage requires functioning when fear is justified, when the threats are real and the odds of success are minimal. Chen nodded slowly. The trial wasn't testing our bravery. It was testing our commitment to duty despite hopeless circumstances. Now you begin to understand the true nature of leadership. Valara turned back to him, and for the first time, Chen saw something in her eyes that looked almost like respect. Tomorrow brings the final trial, the test of wisdom. If courage is acting despite fear, then wisdom is knowing which actions are worth the cost. As night fell, Chen found himself alone in the great hall, the only remaining contestant. The responsibility was beginning to feel real now. Not just as a diplomatic mission, but as something that could actually shape the future of two civilizations. Tomorrow he would face the final test. And if he succeeded, he would become part of something larger than himself. Something that would echo through generations. But tonight, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what he was attempting. He was one human, representing a species barely out of its home system, competing for the right to help shape the destiny of a galactic confederation. The magnitude of it should have been paralyzing. Instead, Chen found it oddly comforting. Throughout human history, ordinary people had faced extraordinary circumstances and somehow found ways to rise to the occasion. His grandfather stopping enemy advances with outdated equipment and sheer determination. His mother negotiating impossible peace treaties through patience and understanding. Millions of unknown humans who had faced their own trials and chosen to persevere rather than surrender. He was part of that tradition now, Not because he was the best candidate humanity could have sent, but because he was the one who was here, facing this moment, carrying the hopes and fears of his entire species into an alien test designed by minds that thought in completely different patterns. The third trial would test wisdom, and Chen suspected that would be the most difficult challenge yet. Strength could be measured. Courage could be demonstrated. But wisdom was subtle, contextual, deeply personal. How did one prove wise judgment to beings whose entire worldview was shaped by experiences humanity couldn't even imagine? But that was tomorrow's challenge. Tonight, Chen would rest and remember that courage wasn't about being unafraid. It was about being afraid of the right things, for the right reasons, and choosing to act anyway because some things were more important than personal safety. The trial of courage was complete, but Chen understood that in a deeper sense, the trial never truly ended. Every significant moment for the rest of his life would require him to choose between fear and duty, between safety and service. Today he had proven he could make that choice when everything was at stake. Tomorrow, he would discover what wisdom looked like when the fate of civilizations hung in the balance. The third dawn on Fenris Prime brought neither ceremony nor pageantry. Chen woke to find Queen Valara sitting in his quarters, her massive form somehow having entered without disturbing his sleep. She sat in meditative silence beside the window, watching the early light paint the crystal peaks in shades of gold and amber. Her war paint was gone, replaced by intricate silver markings that seemed to shift and flow across her fur like living metal. The final trial begins not with fanfare, but with understanding, she said without turning around. Tell me, human, what do you believe wisdom to be? Chen sat up, immediately alert despite the early hour. 3 days on, Fenris had taught him that every moment with the Wolf Queen was a test of some kind. Knowledge applied with good judgment, I suppose. Understanding not just what can be done, but what should be done. Valara's ears twitched, a sign of either amusement or irritation. The textbook answer. But wisdom is not found in books. Diplomat. It is forged in the crucible of impossible choices. When all options lead to suffering, and you must choose which path causes the least harm to those you are sworn to protect. She stood and moved to face him, her amber eyes reflecting the morning light like molten gold. Today you will face the trial of wisdom, but it will not be what you expect. There will be no puzzles to solve, no fears to overcome, no physical challenges to endure. Instead, you will be given power, and we will see what you choose to do with it. Chen dressed quickly and followed the Wolf Queen through corridors he had never seen before, deep into the mountain's heart, where the walls were carved with chronicles that predated written history. The air grew thick with age and reverence, filled with the scent of ancient ceremonies and forgotten rituals. They emerged into a circular chamber unlike anything Chen had encountered on Fenris Prime. The walls were covered with crystalline displays showing star systems throughout the galaxy. Hundreds of worlds spun slowly in holographic splendor, each one pulsing with different colors that Chen somehow understood represented the status of their civilizations. At the chamber's center sat a throne carved from a single massive diamond, its faceted surface reflecting and refracting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Surrounding the throne were control interfaces of such complexity that Chen's diplomatic training could barely begin to categorize their functions. Behold the heart of the Confederation, Valara said, her voice filled with the weight of ages. From this chamber, the Wolf Queen coordinates the defense of 1,200 worlds, manages the resources of 17 different species, and maintains the balance of power that keeps this sector of the galaxy from tearing itself apart in endless war. Chen stared at the displays, beginning to understand the true scope of what he had been competing for. This wasn't just about marriage or alliance. It was about becoming part of the machinery that governed the lives of trillions of beings. The trial of wisdom is simple in concept, Valara continued. You will sit upon the throne of judgment for 1 full day. During that time, you will face every crisis currently threatening the Confederation. You must make decisions that will affect the fate of entire species. You will have access to all our intelligence networks, all our military resources, all our diplomatic channels. Every choice you make will be real. implemented immediately throughout our territories. Chen felt a chill run down his spine. You're asking me to actually govern your empire for a day? To make decisions that could start wars or end them? I am asking you to demonstrate the wisdom necessary to bear the responsibility of leadership. Valera gestured toward the throne. Many can solve puzzles or face their fears. Few can handle the burden of knowing that their every decision will cause someone somewhere to live or die. Chen approached the throne slowly, his mind reeling with the implications. The crystalline surface seemed to pulse with inner light, and as he drew closer, he could hear whispers in languages he didn't recognize, the voices of previous rulers echoing through time. What if I make the wrong choice? What if my decisions cause disasters I can't foresee? Valera's expression softened slightly. Then you will join the ranks of every leader who has ever lived. Wisdom is not about making perfect decisions, human. It is about making the best decisions possible with imperfect information, and accepting the consequences without allowing guilt to paralyze future judgment. Chen sat upon the throne of judgment, and immediately the chamber exploded into activity. The crystalline displays flared to life, showing him crisis reports from across the galaxy. His mind was suddenly flooded with information streams. Intelligence reports, resource allocations, diplomatic communications, and military status updates from hundreds of worlds. The first crisis demanded immediate attention. A plague outbreak on the mining worlds of the Kurtan system was spreading faster than medical resources could contain it. 3 different species had offered assistance, but each had political motivations that could destabilize the region's delicate balance of power. Chen studied the data streams, seeing patterns within patterns. The Dominion offered advanced medical technology, but accepting would give them a foothold in a strategically crucial system. The Crystalline Hive offered genetic adaptation services, but their methods would fundamentally alter the affected population's biology. The Void Wraith Consortium offered to phase the infected populations out of normal spacetime until a cure could be developed, but the psychological trauma of existing in their ethereal dimension often drove beings insane. Each option would save lives, but each carried costs that could echo through generations. Chen closed his eyes, remembering his grandfather's words. When every choice is bad, choose the one that preserves the most dignity for those affected. He authorized the deployment of Confederation medical teams while simultaneously opening negotiations with all 3 offering species for technology sharing agreements that wouldn't grant territorial advantages to any single power. It would be slower than accepting help from one source, but it would preserve the political balance that kept this region stable. Before he could fully process the results of that decision, 3 more crises demanded attention. Pirates were raiding shipping lanes near the Flame Dancer territories, but the military response would require moving fleets away from borders where tensions with expansionist neighbors were already high. A trade dispute between the merchant guilds and the academic consortium threatened to disrupt the flow of scientific knowledge throughout the Confederation. A newly discovered species was requesting membership, but their territorial claims overlapped with existing member worlds. Each decision branched into dozens of consequences. Authorizing military action against pirates would leave borders vulnerable, but protect civilian lives. Refusing action would preserve military positioning but allow attacks to continue. Chen found himself thinking not just about immediate effects, but about how each choice would be interpreted by dozens of different species, with their own agendas and fears. Hours passed in a blur of crisis management and impossible choices. Chen authorized humanitarian aid that strained the Confederation's resources. He negotiated territorial adjustments that satisfied no one but prevented wars. He made trade agreements that would take decades to prove beneficial or disastrous. By midday, Chen was beginning to understand why Queen Valera had ruled alone for so long. The constant stream of decisions was exhausting. Not physically, but emotionally. Every choice meant disappointing someone, leaving some problem partially unsolved, accepting that perfection was impossible and good enough would have to suffice. The crisis that finally broke his composure involved a colony ship full of refugees from a war zone. They were requesting permission to settle in Confederation space, but every available world was already overcrowded or environmentally unsuitable for their species. 3 different member worlds had offered to accept portions of the refugee population. But splitting families apart would cause psychological trauma that could last generations. Chen stared at the data, seeing no good options. Every choice led to suffering. Accept the refugees and strain resources that were already inadequate for existing populations. Refuse them and condemn them to continue wandering space until their ship's life support failed. Split them up and destroy their social structure to save their lives. For the first time since sitting on the throne, Chen felt paralyzed. The weight of responsibility was crushing. The awareness that his decision would determine the fate of thousands of innocent people who had already lost everything they held dear. "I can't," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the hum of the chamber's systems. "I can't choose which kind of suffering to inflict on people who have already suffered enough." Queen Valera's voice came from behind him, gentle but firm. "And now you understand the true burden of leadership. Not the glory of command. Not the satisfaction of solving problems, but the crushing weight of making choices when all options lead to pain." Chen turned to look at her. Tears he hadn't realized he was shedding, blurring his vision. "How do you bear it? How do you make these choices day after day, knowing that people will suffer because of your decisions?" "Because someone must choose," she replied simply. "Because refusing to decide is itself a decision, and usually the worst one possible. Because leadership is not about finding perfect solutions, it is about accepting imperfect ones and working to make them better over time." Chen turned back to the displays, studying the refugee crisis with new eyes. If perfect solutions didn't exist, then the goal wasn't to eliminate suffering but to minimize it while preserving hope for the future. He began drafting a complex solution. Temporary settlement rights on multiple worlds, with resource-sharing agreements to support them, combined with long-term terraforming projects to create new permanent homes. It would take years to implement, strain the Confederation's resources, and require delicate negotiations with member worlds already dealing with their own problems. But it would keep families together while building toward a sustainable future. The day continued with an endless stream of impossible choices. Chen found himself developing a rhythm, a way of thinking that balanced immediate needs against long-term consequences, individual suffering against collective survival, short-term stability against necessary change. As the sun began to set over Fenris Prime, the crisis reports finally slowed to a manageable stream. Chen sat back in the crystalline throne, emotionally drained but oddly satisfied. He had made dozens of decisions that would affect millions of lives, and while none of them were perfect, each had been the best he could manage with the information and resources available. Queen Valara approached the throne, studying the day's decisions displayed on the surrounding screens. "Tell me, human, what have you learned from your day of absolute power?" Chen considered the question carefully. That power isn't the ability to get what you want. It's the obligation to choose what others need, even when that choice costs you personally. That wisdom isn't about knowing the right answers, it's about asking the right questions and accepting that some problems can only be managed, not solved. And do you still wish to proceed with this alliance? Knowing that success would bind you to centuries of such choices, Chen stood from the throne, his legs shaky from hours of sitting in one position. "Your Majesty, I've spent the day making decisions that will echo through history. Some will prove wise, others will prove foolish, and most will prove to be both, depending on perspective. But every choice was made with the intent to preserve life, protect dignity, and build toward a better future." He met her amber gaze steadily. "If that's what leadership means in your confederation, then yes, I wish to proceed. Not because I think I'm the best possible choice, but because I'm the choice that's here, now, willing to accept the responsibility." Queen Valara was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those ancient eyes. Then, slowly, she began to smile, revealing fangs that no longer seemed threatening but protective. "The human passes the trial of wisdom," she announced, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystalline chamber ring like a bell. "Not through perfection of judgment, but through understanding that wisdom lies in accepting imperfection while striving for something better." She gestured toward the displays, showing the results of Chen's decisions. Your choices today were not flawless, but they were thoughtful. You balanced competing needs, considered long-term consequences, and accepted personal responsibility for outcomes you could not fully control. These are the qualities that make a leader worthy of the Fenris bloodline. Chen felt a warmth spreading through his chest. Not of pride, but of relief. He had somehow managed to meet a challenge that had seemed impossible 3 days ago. What happens now? Now we begin the real work, Velara replied, moving to stand beside him before the galactic displays. The trials were meant to determine worthiness, but worthiness is only the beginning. Building a partnership between our peoples. Navigating the complexities of interspecies governance. Creating something stronger than either of our civilizations could achieve alone that will take years of effort, compromise, and shared sacrifice. She turned to face him, and Chen saw something in her expression that transformed her from an alien queen into something more personal. But I believe we can build something worthy of the challenges ahead. Your species brings qualities my people have forgotten in our centuries of strength. The ability to find solutions through persistence rather than power. To unite diverse perspectives rather than dominating them. To see opportunity in adversity rather than merely enduring it. Chen nodded, understanding that this was both an ending and a beginning. The trials were complete, but the real test would be whether two very different species could truly work together to build something larger than themselves. There will be opposition, Velara continued. Many in the Confederation still view humans as primitive newcomers, unworthy of significant alliance. Many on Earth will question the wisdom of binding your species' fate to alien powers. We will face challenges that make today's crises seem simple. But we'll face them together, Chen replied, surprised by the conviction in his own voice. And maybe that will make all the difference. As the twin moons of Fenris Prime rose over the crystal peaks, Chen Nakamura stood beside the Wolf Queen in the heart of the Confederation, watching the lights of 1,000 worlds pulse in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new crises, new impossible choices. But tonight, he felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood. The absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The trials were ended. The partnership was begun. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, the future of two civilizations was being written by a human diplomat who had learned that true strength came not from being fearless, but from acting with courage, wisdom, and compassion in spite of fear. The Wolf Queen had found her mate. Humanity had found its place among the stars, and the galaxy would never be quite the same.